we were saying about Israel and the church is different. So why we see? So Reformed view or Reformed theology see that church is the continuation from the Old Testament. That's what a Reformed view actually says. We saw that. And what we are trying to argue here is that no, church is distinct. And sometime a Reformed view would teach church is a spiritual Israel. And I am saying that is also a wrong wording, but we will talk about that later sometime as I discuss this issue. So I said, church is distinct in character. That is what my first point. Distinct in character, right? Its components are distinct. So I asked the question, when did Israel had its beginning? Remember, that's the question. Israel had its beginning. There are two types of beginning: a racial beginning, a political beginning. Racial beginning happened from the time of Abraham. So if you read Genesis chapter 1 to 11 is the general history of the world, but chapter 12 onwards, it is the specific history. That is the history of Israel from chapter 12. Because chapter 12, we see God calls Abraham, right? And tells him, I will make you a nation, a great nation. So it is the racial beginning. Israel as a race began from Abraham, but it was not a nation until, when they had the law, the constitution received. That it was at Mount Sinai when Moses received the 10 Commandments, which was a founding document of Israel. Founding documents of Israel. And then all the law, about maybe 613 laws that are in the Old Testament, in the part of law is given to Israel, are part of the constitution of Israel. So we say, yes, it is, it's different. And I said, components are distinct, right? In the church, there is no Jew, no Gentiles. And I was saying, for Israel, even if you're converted Gentile, you are converted to Judaism, still there was a separation of wall. Gentiles were not able to go to certain places of the temple. They are not allowed. But when it comes to the New Testament, in the church, there is no difference at all. That's what I said in the last class. And then I also talked about the basis of the union. We talked about the baptism there. We also talked about ministry of indwelling. A certain aspect is unique to the church, I said. And then I said church is distinct in time. So we talked about this one. All right, church began not from Abraham. Church began on the day of Pentecost. I talked about all these things yesterday. Now, I wanted to talk about church is distinct from Israel, the female idea. Okay, church is distinct from Israel. The term Israel always carries with its racial and ethnic overtones that are absent in the anti-discussion of church. Yeah, it is not, when the New Testament talks about the church, that racial ethnic overtones are absent. Covenant theology, in an aggressive but misguided effort to protect the immutability of God, they say God is unchangeable, and therefore they seek a seamless continuity between Israel in the Old Testament and church in the New Testament. They seek a continuity. Israel, they would say, is the church in the Old Testament. And the church is the new Israel. That is the common terminology that covenant theology would use. All right? Israel is the church in the Old Testament, and the church is the new Israel. Now, why we said this is wrong? The immutability of God, that is the first place they hold, does not demand that God is changeless in his activities. Yeah. It doesn't say that God should never change his actions or that his programs are immobile. that God will never change his program. No. It means that his character is constant. That is what immutability teaches. And his purposes and decree are fixed from eternity. Yes, whatever he has planned will never change. But it doesn't mean that his programs are immobile, or that's not what it means. While God's purpose for ethnic Israel will never change. Yeah, what God promised to Israel, a kingdom to come, will never change. Absolutely right. God will do that. Right? And God promised the prominence of ethnic Israel in God's eternal program is not a static phenomenon. Right? So here's while God's purpose for ethnic Israel will never change, the prominence of ethnic Israel in God's eternal program is not a static phenomenon. Change in God's dealing with men did not render him mutable or capricious. No. In fact, it is the immutability of God that the dispensationalist stands in the way of affirming continuity between Israel and the church. Right? We would say, yes, it is the immutability of God for the dispensationalist stands in the way of affirming continuity. Actually, it is that the same doctrine, where God to rescind his covenant promises with Israel, or to redefine Israel in non-ethnic terms. What should God do? Should God move away from his covenant that God promised to Israel? Dispensationalists would say God will never do that. God will not change the covenant that is made with Abraham. Remember, we learned the Abrahamic covenant. Very, very important. God will not change it at all. That I will make you a great nation, and the whole world will be blessed by your seed. God will not change. God will not change the covenant that he made with David, that your throne will be forever. So that is actually that same immutability that makes dispensationalists say the plan of God for Israel will never change. Will never change. It will be there. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that God can change the way that he deals with the people in his, especially his program. And we are saying the church is such a program where God has, in his eternity, decided that, yes, in one hand, God will preserve a prominence for a Jewish nation, but at the same time, God also wants to seek out and save everyone from this world among Gentiles to be the part of that kingdom. And in order for that to be, when Israel failed, God is using the church so that the church will go, share the gospel, and people are saved from the world, every language, every nation, and they all will be part of the same kingdom that God promised to Israel. So that's what dispensation says. Second, Israel is addressed as a nation after the church is established. Yeah. Even after the church is established, Israel was addressed as a nation. So I have given the verses, if you look at, for example, Peter, in the first sermon itself, Peter replied to the people, said, "Men of Israel." He did not say he did not say new Israel, spiritual Israel. Still, Israel was Israel. Israel was Israel. All right. Then here is important word. Let's look at, okay, let's read this verse now from 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 32. This is very important for our discussion. Can you read, anyone, please?
Yeah. Do not cause anyone to stumble, whether Jews, Greeks, or the church of God.
Okay. So, what should we understand? What should we understand? Paul here clearly uses Jews and Greeks, right? You know that Greek is a representative term for all Gentiles, right? Greek, the word Greek is to represent all those who are not Jews, all those who are not Jewish are Gentiles. So he says, so he's using these two terms as ethnic distinctions. You know, Jews are different, Greeks are different. What else is different? The church. So he intimates that neither group to be equated with the Church of God. Church of God is completely different. There is no Jew, no Greek. Church of God is completely different. Because here there is no distinction. Yes, this is racial differences. You can have racial differences, Jews and Gentiles. That difference is still here. Unlike some people say, oh, we are spiritual Israel. No, we are not spiritual Israel. We are the Church of God. We are separated from Jews. We are separated from Gentiles who don't believe in God and the gospel. We are separated. We are Church of God. So New Testament clearly distinguishes church from the race, from the racial differences. Next one, the NC distinguishes. Now, listen, this is important words, right? Here is the stumbling place, right? It is in Galatians. This is where everyone stumbles, especially in understanding. And I think even from Reformed, New Testament distinguishes Jews and Gentiles within the church, right? Even within the church, New Testament distinguishes. Are there people who are Gentiles? Yeah, let's look at this verse, right? This is what we read, Galatians. Let me give you a time to look into this one, Galatians 6. I think I have seen many quoting this one. So Galatians 6:15, we read, neither circumcision, anything, nor uncircumcision. So when he says circumcision, uncircumcision, right? He talks about circumcision is a kind of Jewish, right? Jewish. Uncircumcision, Gentiles. He says neither circumcision is anything, nor uncircumcision. So idea is circumcision is anything, no, nothing. Uncircumcision is nothing. Whether Jew or Gentiles, it's nothing. For God, the important thing is what? A new creation, right? In the church, right? In the church, it's not a big thing, right? Big thing. Now, when we read the next way, and those who will walk by this rule, right? Those who walk by this rule, he says, peace and mercy be upon them and upon the Israel of God. That is the difficult place, all right? So who is this Israel of God? Right? Is it the church? Or is it something else? Let's look at it. Right. I say here, this is a favorite of those who equate the church with Israel of God. All right. Those who call the church is the new Israel or a spiritual Israel, they take this verse and equate with the, church is the Israel of God. However, the syntax favors the opposite conclusion. Let's look at the options. Covenant theologians typically argue for the offensive use of the term kai. Where is kai? Right? Kai is here. Greek word kai. And, right? And about they use this kai, offensive use. What maybe you didn't learn Greek grammar in that day. So what it says, this understanding equates the two terms that's connected with by the conjunction and is translated even or that is. So covenant theologians say this is offensive usage. So the idea is that this can be translated as even or that is. So, for example, NIV would translate peace, peace and mercy be upon them, all right? So they would say, peace and mercy to all who follow this rule, even to the Israel of God. That's how NIV translates, right? So they say that it equates, right? This Israel of God equates, Israel of God is equal to church. So that is what covenant theology would explain. Now, by far, the most common use of the term kai is symbol coordination, coordinative conjunction. Or the other way is the copulation. That's the grammar. This understanding recognize the second group that is added to the first, right? It is added, it is coordinating, right? It is added and is translated and also, right? And also. In this case, Paul is bestowing a blessing upon those who follow new rule, right? Of non-circumcision and also upon the believing Jews, that is Israel God, that continue to follow the old rule of the circumcision. So those who say that this is coordinating conjunction, they would say, yes, so this the peace be upon those who follow new rule. That is a reference to Gentile believers, Gentile Christian, and believing. So that is Jewish Christian, So Israel of God means Jewish Christians. So peace be upon those Gentile Christian as well as Jewish Christian. That is what some would explain. And there's one more way to explain. That is, another possibility is that this term kai is used emphatically. Okay, this understanding emphasizes the second group and is translated especially. So they would say, peace be upon all who follow this new rule, especially upon the Israel of God. This usage would have the effect of especially commending Jews for breaking with 15 years of Mosaic adherence and aligning with the church. So that means if you really understand the verse, argument is this, it is not an offensive use at all, for sure. That is how covenant theology says. So he would say, neither is circumcision anything, nor, so that means whether you are a Jew, whether a Gentile is not a big thing, and there's nothing important in that, but a new creation is important, right? New creation, that is, the work God has worked in you, given you a new heart, that is most important. And then he says, so those who will walk by this rule, right? Peace and mercy upon them, right? So whether you are a Jew or a Gentile, it doesn't mean, those who walk by this rule, peace be upon them. And then he says, especially upon the Israel of God. Idea is that Paul wants to give a slight importance here for the Jewish Christians, because they have come out of Mosaic law and believed in Christ, breaking away that 1500-year-old tradition, right? So second view and the third view see Israel of God as Jewish Christians, Jewish believers, right? Covenant theology would say, no, this is actually equating this new creation. New creation is equal to Israel of God. That's what covenant theology's argument. Equate. I think that is not the argument. I prefer the third view, where I said the translation especially upon. That is, the idea is that peace and mercy to all who follow this new rule, that there is no circumcision, there is no difference between Jew or Gentile. That is a new rule. And he says, peace and mercy to all who follow this new rule, that now there is no circumcision, no Jew, no Gentile. And then he emphasizes peace and mercy to be upon especially the Israel of God, the Jewish Christians, because you have come out. You've been taught until this time Gentiles are to be separated. Now you come to Christ, learn the forgiveness from Christ, and see that Christ looks at everyone. May you have special peace, right? And Paul being a Jew, because remember, he's using the word peace and mercy. It's hashalom, right? The peace and mercy to the people. So he's using that one. So that's how I see this passage. So this is one that has a lot of ink has been poured out in explaining. All right. Now I wanted to go and talk about something more about about Israel now. I will stop now here because I don't